there's an overwhelming case. We've got to bear in mind, first of all, that Jacob Zuma's financial advisor, Shabir Sheikh, was actually convicted of corrupting Jacob Zuma, and he was sentenced to 15 years. He was then allowed out of prison, or actually prison hospital, where he'd spent just over a year once Zuma became president. But the fact remains, he was convicted of corrupting Jacob Zuma. That verdict was upheld by 3 courts, including the Constitutional Court. The amount of documentary evidence in relation to this particular case is therefore huge, because the prosecutors built their case against Shabir Sheikh. The other interesting thing to bear in mind is that at the time, and I've written about this in my first book, After the Party, the prosecutors actually wanted to charge Shabir Sheikh and Jacob Zuma together. It's believed that political factors caused them at the last moment to have to separate the charge sheet. So if one looks at the charge sheet that was ultimately used to charge and convict Shabir Sheikh, Jacob Zuma obviously appears extensively in that. Then the second thing to bear in mind is that there is now an enormous amount of evidence that has been in the public domain for many years. So if one takes that evidence, one takes the conviction of Shabir Sheikh, I think it is fair to say that the evidence is overwhelming.
Andrew, if we could go on about your resignation at the time, some argued that you did step on a few toes. Is this actually in line with, well, some of the accusations that you made to start with?
Well, absolutely. I mean, what I argued from the beginning when I was a member of Parliament and the ranking ANC member on the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, and also deputy chair of the country's Audit Commission, was that there was a huge amount of prima facie evidence of corruption in the deal. The corruption involving Jacob Zuma was one element of that. And I think we see here how political bias came into the decision-making process, in the sense that Shabir Sheikh and Jacob Zuma were quite correctly pursued, but at the same time there were others who were perhaps closer to Thabo Mbeki, the then president, such as Joe Modise, whose investigation wasn't pursued. And there was a huge amount of evidence against Joe Modise as well. But all of this together, including the corruption of Jacob Zuma and Shabir Sheikh, was why in the Public Accounts Committee we were arguing for a massive multi-agency investigation into the deal. Unfortunately, the ANC tried to persuade me in the first instance to stop the investigation, and then when I refused to, they effectively forced me out of Parliament. And really all that we could do, yeah.
Are you going on record to say that the ANC made a clear attempt to persuade you, or even persuaded you, to stop with your investigation? Are you saying this?
Oh, unequivocally. I mean, I've written about this extensively. There were a number of different attempts, starting with people I was close to in the party, inviting me around to their houses for lunch and saying to me, look, we can't deal with this thing publicly, because the ANC used some of the money for the 1999 election, to what felt like intimidation, when very senior members of the party would scream at me that... sorry?
Can you give us a name?
Not of the person who invited me for lunch, because that person decided when I wrote about this that they didn't want their name in the public domain, because they were a very prominent member of the ANC. In terms of the people who tried to intimidate me and other members of the Public Accounts Committee, I mean, it's well known that Esop Fahad was at the forefront of those initiatives and that intimidation. And then it escalated until eventually I was asked to see the General Secretary of the organization at the time, Kgalema Motlanthe. And even though Kgalema was quite sympathetic, he said the president is unequivocal on this matter, and we discussed the fact that they were going to remove me at the next opportunity that they could do that. And I resigned the night before that was going to happen. So, and there were many people involved in that process, including the defense minister at the time, Maswai Lakota, including the Speaker of Parliament, Freni Jinwala. This is all documented in detail in my first book, After the Party. And the one interesting thing about that was initially, while pressure was being brought to bear on me by people who were close to Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma at that point would communicate with me either through his parliamentary political counselor or directly. I met him at his office late at night a couple of times, and he would effectively say to me, "You need to continue with this inquiry. This is in the national interest in what you expect to do." And I was very confused. On the one hand, part of the party was saying, "Stop." Zuma was saying, "Continue." And it was only subsequently that I understood what Zuma was doing. And that was, Shabir Sheikh had organized for him to receive an amount of R500,000 a year from the French defense company Thomson CSF, which today is known as Thales. Once what is now quite a notorious encrypted fact was received. So what happened was that they had offered money to Zuma to effectively protect their interests in South Africa. None of that money had been forthcoming. I discovered subsequently that what had happened was Zuma effectively used me and used my committee to up the ante. So in other words, to give the impression that there was going to be an investigation into the corruption. This then concerned Thomson CSF, who then on the 13th of December 2000, I think it was, sent an encrypted fax to Shabir Sheikh. In that fax, they said, effectively, the first payment will be in the agreed bank account on, and I think it was the 21st of January 2001. From that moment that the encrypted fax was received, Jacob Zuma cut off all communication with me and enabled the ANC, Thabo Mbeki's people to effectively start the process of getting rid of me. And that was quite an extraordinary experience because I was very confused as to what was going on. But subsequently, it appeared to me that Jacob Zuma was using me and using my committee's interest in the matter to effectively reignite the interest of the company who'd offered to pay him money to protect their interests. And once they'd reiterated that, he had no use for the investigation and he was happy for it to be closed down.